Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here today and have an opportunity to share with you some of my experiences and time. The title, very deliberately chosen, reducing end-to-end supply chain cost by improving customer service. And I've chosen that title because I get really irritated when people tell me the way you reduce your supply chain costs is by delivering poorer service to your customers. Yeah? I hear that a lot. I hear the great and the good, the Ollie Whites will often put that into their IBP training materials. I was at a conference recently and it just really wound me up because I'm a very passionate believer that perfect in-full service gives you your best supply chain costs. Okay? So that's why I've chosen this topic. In terms of introductions, 22 years in FMCG. Industries, fabric and home care, the exciting part of washing machine powders and fairy liquids. Cosmetics, slightly more glamorous, and then the crazy world of fresh produce, bananas, pineapples, milk and cheese. I've worked across the supply chain, but a little bit about Muller, milk and ingredients. If you're in the Diageo presentation, we do the same amount of liquid. I don't think people can drink quite so much spirits as milk as an individual person. So 3.5 billion litres of milk per year in the UK, supplying most of the major malts apart from Asda. So the purpose of this presentation is to share with you that it doesn't really matter whether it's very liquid cheese, 3-year maturation, 5-year maturation, milk, or cosmetics. It really doesn't matter. We've used exactly the same toolkit and exactly the same principles to deliver at least 99.99% in full. Okay? Doesn't matter what it is. The principles we've used, only really 5. Actually, the 5th one is just 3 times 4. So there's only really 4. Know your true end-to-end supply chain constraints. This morning, people called that little data, so know about your own manufacturing constraints. I don't talk about lead times. I think lead times are a meaningless concept, and we talk about cycle times. The sexiest part of the presentation, family planning. We'll talk about that quite a lot. And then supply chain efficiency, the classic, let's have long manufacturing runs because that's cost efficient, versus let's be consumer, customer driven and actually make what the customer wants. Yeah. So for me, the biggest sin is to make something that nobody wants to buy. That is the biggest cause of inefficiency. And then the combined effect of that and how powerful that can be. So hopefully we can rattle through that in 25 minutes. So is this talk relevant to yourselves? So we have 3 case studies. The first one, long shelf life products, single market, big volume, 150 SKUs, very much retail driven. A reasonable degree of volatility, not massive. Case study 2, long shelf life items, thousands of SKUs, very volatile oversells of 10,000%, quite normal for a given market. Undersells, very normal. Very high product churn, so if a product is in the brochure for more than a year, that's going some. A lot of innovation. Catalogue driven, so not actually through the retailers. The third case study, short shelf life, less than a day's stock, hundreds of SKUs, thousands of collection points of the raw material, thousands of delivery points. So we deliver predominantly to a supermarket store, and in some cases to the distribution centre, but thousands of delivery points. UK only, so a single market, but multi-channel, not just to the major malts. So if your supply chain or your supplier's supply chain is one of those, or a mix of those, then this talk is relevant. Okay? And what we've delivered in each of those is consecutive periods of perfect service. So we will go through 30 days or 12 weeks at a time without shorting a single unit. We've delivered inventory reductions in all of those, and in case study 2, we took out $100 million of slow-moving and obsolete and excess stock. And we've delivered cost savings measured in millions on this supply chain. The start point is to really know your true end-to-end supply chain constraints. And the first thing that we looked at is our inbound materials. Do we actually know through flow mapping, the tool we use we call flow mapping, and it's really about being able to answer the questions about your suppliers. How do they actually make my product? So when I first started in the company, we started having a supply issue with bottles. You ask the materials planner, well, what's the capacity of the supplier? Don't know. That's not good enough. You have to know how they make your products. You have to know what are their changeover times and what different types of changeover do they have. Because if you don't understand their constraints, you don't know how much of a problem you're creating for them. How are they actually planning and scheduling the production on your behalf? So when you send an order through to them, what do they do with it? Do they sit on it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Do they wait for the next available production slot, which could be 12 weeks out? Or does it automatically flow through the process and go to their production lines? What it might look like is something like this. I describe it as you take a photograph of that supply chain on that day. And this is for manufacturing of a cap. So this is the start point, so manufacturing line at the supplier. They make the cap, they send the cap out to have it spray painted, and eventually that gets sent off to the factory, okay? But when we actually look at the starting materials, this is a fairly simple supply chain. They only have 3 starting materials, and they would have quoted a lead time of 12 to 16 weeks, okay? What we actually established is the cheapest part of those materials, they would have called it the most expensive part, the colorant, the master batch. So you say to them, why aren't you holding stock of your master batch? Well, Mr. Dicken, we would do, but it's really expensive. But what do you mean it's expensive? Oh, it costs thousands of pounds per ton. Okay, but how many caps can you make out of 1 kilo? Oh, thousands. So what you're doing is you're holding stock at the end of your process at its highest value, but you haven't got any starting stock. And when you run out of starting stock, because it takes you 12 days or 15 days to get that master batch back in, you're adding that into my lead time. And so I'll do you a deal. I'll cover the financial risk of your master batch, yeah, but we'll take 80% of your finished stock out, and we'll reduce your lead time. Okay? So what we try to do is we try to map from the beginning to the end, how long does everything take in the current process, how much stock do we have at each part of the process, how much stock am I holding, how much stock have they got as finished product, how much stock in work in progress, and how much stock of the starting materials. And what are the changeover times and the changeover types within their manufacturing processes? So one of the things we did at my time at P&G was we allocated plastic pouches by size. So supplier A did 1 litre, supplier B did half a litre. What we discovered was size didn't matter to them, a bit like family planning, but what we also noticed was the colour was important. So we gave them all the Ariel, which was green, and the Fairy, which was green, to one supplier, and then the other one did the blues and the reds. Okay? And that took out about 5% cost. Common observations on flow mapping suppliers: a lot of finished goods stock, but no investment in starting materials. I made a visit to a glass supplier for skincare products, so decorated glass products. Went to their factory, walked through the gates, massive pile, bigger than this room, of broken glass on the middle of the floor. They said, Mr. Dicken, this is all the glass that you've not bought from us. We've had it in stock for 2 years. We're now grinding it down, breaking it and smashing it up, which wasn't a great start to my visit. What we then discovered was you were holding massive amounts of finished product, but you weren't holding any of the master batch. It was the same issue. Okay? Most of the lead times that we were quoted was nothing to do with the manufacturing process. It was the time waiting for the next manufacturing slot, which is crazy because I'm going to take 1 million widgets off you every week. You know that. So rather than waiting for me to give you an order, just put in your production plan 1 million per week, and I'll tell you the day before which SKUs I want you to make. Okay? So that lead time of I send you an order, you process the order, you put it into your production plan, that's all gone. Just taking it out. We'd often find that each of the manufacturing steps would be planned separately. And in the manufacturing of lipsticks, that's crazy because the downstream process is much faster than the upstream. So don't plan the two separately and have stock in the middle. As soon as it comes off the first process, just take it straight through the second. And all of these fixes come out of flow mapping. One of the things that we're often guilty of is we ask our suppliers to do things that just don't make sense. So we had a supplier of sunblock bottles, so very much depends on the season and depends on the weather, and they would have to pre-build stock for months ahead of the summer peak. What we discovered was that by visiting their factory, what's that chap doing there? Well, we've run all the bottles off. We're now going to reset the machine and put them back through the printing process again. But why are you doing that? Well, we have 6 printing heads, and you've got 7 colours. Yeah? So what they were doing is they were printing 6 colours, put it into stock, reset the machine, and try and get it perfectly aligned to put the 7th colour on. Okay? So by turning one of the colours, the barcode background colour, to yellow, we then actually reduced the number of colours from 7 to 6. Their capacity went up by more than a factor of 2. We no longer need to do any stock building in advance, and we eliminated all of the wastage. So that's about knowing your supply chain very well, but we also need to know our own supply chains better. And very often I find that we don't really know what our true constraints are. Lead times. When people quote a lead time, what lead time are they actually referring to? Is it the lead time to ship something from stock? But if they've run out of stock, that lead time is no longer relevant because they then have to make it. Is it the lead time for them to make it, ship it, or to make it, ship it, and buy in the materials? So what I've tended to do is focus much less on lead time and much more on cycle times. My definition for cycle time is how frequently do we make that product? How often am I making the same product twice? It's a pretty simple calculation. If we take our cycle time, 52 weeks a year, how many times do we produce it per year? Number of productions per year is going to be driven by your volume and the batch size. So if my sales are 1 million, if my batch size is 100,000, on average I'll make it every 5 weeks, 10 times a year. Supply chain actually can dictate the volume as well as the batch size. We all know that supply chain can influence this, but it can also have a major impact on the volume. And that's through family planning. Okay? So in all the businesses I've worked in, the minimum production quantity, the minimum buy quantity, has always been quoted as it's 10,000 of that product in that bottle with that label. Okay? So when I started in Fairy Liquid, it was 10,000 green bottles, half a litre for Iceland, the country, not Iceland, the retailer. Yep. And you go, well, hold on. The label change is irrelevant. If you're stopping the line to change the label, you shouldn't be doing that anyway, but that changeover is only 2-3 minutes. So why are you quoting your minimum run length about a constraint that's meaningless? Yep. And actually, we do a lot of green liquid and fairy liquid. Yep. And what was the only thing that was important was the bottle size. So the minimum buy quantity, the minimum order quantity, then becomes, you can actually have a layer of a pallet, which is equivalent of 5 or 10 minutes production time. Okay? Because once I've done that label for Iceland, I just do a flying change, because I've got 2 label heads onto Portugal. Then I move to Spain, then I move to Italy, and then to the UK. And that's been the same in all of the industries I've worked in, is people have quoted their minimum production quantities by an individual product rather than thinking about what's the constraint that actually matters. Once we've identified the true constraints, so within the milk industry, we will have different labels. We have different milk types, different milk grades, so semi-skimmed, skimmed, 1%, and we will have different bottle size. Once you've identified what is the true constraint, you can then say, what are all the products I do that are actually the same? Yep. And that builds your family. Cycle time, the key thing here is how long should we run the product for once we've done a line changeover? Quite typically, people want to run 7 or 8 times. So if we do a changeover for an hour, let's run it for a shift, yeah, because that shift's 8 hours. Once you've ran for more than 3 or 4 times, the changeover time, your benefit in incremental percentage efficiency uptime starts, it's a decaying curve. So we always say, once you've ran 3 or 4 times, I've got 75% or 80% uptime. If I run longer, my benefit is decreasing all the time. Okay? There's no point making stock that people don't need or don't want. If we bring those 2 concepts together, what does it actually look like? So we'll take an example. Family size of 1, annual volume 100,000, batch size 20,000 pieces. I'll be making it 5 times a year, cycle time of 10 weeks. Once I implement family planning, I actually identify that 5 of those products are exactly the same. Okay? So my annual volume is now 500,000 for that family. I've got the same batch size. I haven't done anything to change that yet. But my cycle time is now down to 2 weeks. I'm starting to get closer to the true demand rather than the forecast. We then challenge ourselves from the point of view of the batch size, so that bottom part of the equation. I start with a changeover time of an hour, and I run for the rest of the shift, so I produce for 7 hours. We do some work, some SMED work to get that changeover time down to 30 minutes. We then run 4 times the changeover time, so I run for 2 hours. Batch size has gone from 20,000 to 6,000. Okay? So my cycle time is now half a week. Okay? So rather than my cycle time started at making it once every 10 weeks. By changing 2 things, I can now run that product every 2 or 3 days. Okay? So the amount of inventory I'm holding as a consequence is just gone. If I undersell or oversell, it doesn't really matter, because I'm making it anyway. So we go back to the 3 case studies. Case study 1, long shelf life, 150 SKUs. Case study 2, thousands of SKUs. Case study 3, short shelf life products, milk. What results have we seen? So case study 1, we actually fairy liquid. People assume that there are warehouses full of fairy liquid because it's long shelf life. So across Europe, we were holding less than 3-day stock. We went 18 consecutive weeks without a single case being shorted. And we reduced the minimum order quantity, internal order quantity, if you like, down to what was equivalent to just 10 minutes production on the manufacturing line. Case study 2, in the cosmetics industry, the piece fill rate was a disaster. It was 90%. If you're a representative ordering 20 items, at 90% likelihood in each one, only 10, 15% of the orders were complete in full. We took that to greater than 99.5, and we took out $100 million of inventory. And actually, I met a colleague this morning who told me consultancy, they now use that as one of their key chapters in the book. So I'm going to tap him up later for my share of his commission. Case study 3, we routinely deliver 99.999% in full. We've got less than 24 hours stock. We've actually increased our capacity. We do more label changes than we've ever done before. So we do more changeovers, but because we take this family scheduling, family planning approach, we do much fewer milk type changes and fewer bottle changes. And in an industry that's not high margin, it is a commodity, that's the equivalent to us of an additional high-speed filling line in our network. We've taken millions of pounds out in our wastage, and we've reduced the end-to-end supply chain costs significantly as well, and we've increased the service. Our mission statement is 0 shorts, 0 wastage, 1 set of numbers, which is your IBP or S&OP process. Optimum end-to-end cost is really a result of that and is underpinned by people. And hopefully, I've shared with you a sense of how we can reduce end-to-end supply chain whilst also delivering perfect service. Any questions? Not sure how long we've got.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yeah, my question is, how did you go about winning hearts and minds to drive the vision in the first place?
Yeah, because when you talk about, it's a good question, because when you talk about 0 shorts, immediately people say, well, it's going to cost a fortune. And I think we've always relied on, this is not about the misconception of, we've got a service issue, so let's get a taxi to get the product to the customer, and we'll have 100 taxis going to every single one of the customer's stores. This is about, we've done this in the past, we can show it's worked, yeah, give us the confidence, believe in it. I think people, when we talk about perfect service, they assume you're going to throw money at it. So we use some examples and say, this is really about, if you've had a failure, understand the root cause of the failure. And then once you put it right on one supply chain, when you reapply that solution, you'll solve 100 other problems as well. Yeah, but you do definitely get resistance. And also for manufacturing, because they want those big, long run lengths. And then it's using that chart that says, once you've got 4 times your changeover time back, the incremental percentage improvements are very small. And when we take that family approach, we normally increase their available production time because they're not doing the big changeovers. Yep.
Do you find that you have to bake in extra capacity to be able to operate under those conditions from what was the perceived norm before?
No, we actually found that we were switching lines off. So you do need to recognise there's a level of volatility. Yeah, we typically been running 92, 95% utilised on capacity. Yeah, so we don't have that headroom. I think if you have a set of products that are very volatile, you may choose to have some headroom just for that. But I think that cost of agility, so within Avon, we bought 2 small mixers, tiny little mixers, and we had 30. That investment of 2 more took out $50 million worth of inventory. Yeah, so it's about the more agility you have, and that agility doesn't normally cost a lot of money to install, because once you understand it, the more your agility, the less I'm actually worried about my demand forecast. Because if it's wrong, it doesn't matter. I can deal with it.